Thank you all very much. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really happy that this session is going after the morning session on economic development that you wanted there. Because last night we talked about the triangle of environment, social equity, and economy. And in all of our discussions about environment, we kept referencing the importance of paying attention to social equity and the economic imperatives. But when we got to the economic discussion this morning, the discussion of environment fell away, and the discussion about social equity didn't come up until you mayors raised it and said, can we afford to write off all these young people because they're our future? And so what I want to do is bring us back to that triangle. And when we talk about multi-generational planning today, we're not going to forget to talk about the economy and the environment as well when we think about it, because it's that triangle that motivates how we think of it. But I'm going to give you a different triangle that's specific to multi-generational planning to help you think this through. Because here we have little kids on one end, we have seniors who eventually become frail on the other end. Let's call them the pre-car and the post-car generation. And we design our cities as if the only people who live there are the people who have cars. And we design our economies as if the only people who live there are the people who are going to be designing the next computer. We need to think about designing our cities physically, designing our services, and designing our economies as if everybody gets born, like the baby born yesterday. Congratulations to Frank. And everybody, if they're lucky enough, gets old before they die. And the city has to be able to accommodate the needs of that whole group. And the thing we're thinking of here is if we would rethink physical design so that every street was accessible to everyone. If we would rethink our services from age-segregated silos to integrated services for everyone, maybe then we could come together with a common vision instead of having a war of generations of elders versus young. We could have a collaborative approach. And if we did that, the poor sandwich in the middle, which is most of us in this room, would feel a little less stressed, because our children would be able to be more independent safely, and our parents would be able to be more independent safely. And if we design our cities right, we can get there. So I am going to spend a couple of minutes talking about why we should do this. I'm going to talk about demographics. I'm going to talk about public expenditure challenges, because you are mayors and you face them. I'm going to talk about economic development imperatives. I'm going to talk about the part of economy that the first panel this morning didn't talk about. And I'm going to talk in the end about planning and service design solutions. You know, you hear this concept called a population pyramid. The only place in the world where it still looks like a pyramid, which means you have more children than old, so you can afford to have some of them die and some of them not graduate from high school and some of them not rise to be productive members of society. The only places that look like that are in Africa. I don't want to go there. If you look at the US, our population pyramid is not a pyramid anymore, it's a house. And the foundation of that house is little kids. And there are not that many of them anymore. And we don't invest enough in their future so that they can hold up this heavy weight of the roof of all these old people that are sitting there. If you look at Spain, it looks really bad. They don't have enough immigration to give them a house, and they're going to fall over. And it's even worse than that, because the unemployment rates in this age group are 50%. Spanish kids with possibility are leaving. China, they've got a big problem too. They said, okay, we're going to address environmental issues by having a one-child policy. Okay, but their approach for dealing with elders is to keep it in the family. Think of that single child, 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 6 adults that single child has to take care of. The family system can't hold that up anymore. They're going to have a reverse population pyramid before long. We're lucky, thank God we have immigration. Let me repeat. Thank God we have immigration. If we didn't have immigration, we would look like Spain. I don't want to go there. But we have a problem, because our younger population is more heavily not white. And our older population is more heavily white. Our younger population is poorer. People in entry-level jobs make less today than they did 30 years ago. We need to invest so that these young families will build the future for our economy. Dowell Myers wrote a wonderful book called Immigrants and Boomers. And he says we need a new social compact. If you want to grow old well and have a good nurse to take care of you, somebody to buy your house, you better be investing in young kids, because if they don't have the education to get the skills to get the jobs they need, you are not going to have a good senior experience. What do we do as a society? We invest in our people. That's what economic development is about. It's about investing in people and investing in quality of life. But we invest a basketball worth of investment in seniors and a tennis ball worth of investment in children. It's even worse than that. The federal government pays attention to investment in seniors and pretty much ignores children. Children are your responsibility. At the local and state level, you bear the primary cost of this. And one of the concerns is, and I hear this from planners, is that some cities work to zone out families in the middle, families with young children, because they cost too much, because those kids are going to go to school. We don't want to bear that burden. Well, sure enough, if you look at state and local expenditure, it jumps up at age 5 and then drops back down around age 18. Oh, there's a little bit down here for community colleges, right? So if we can keep these people out, then we can save money. This is stupid, short-sighted, unsustainable thinking. Oh, other communities say, oh, let's go for gray gold, because the gray gold of the elders are just so great, right? Well, when you get about 75, look at how the costs start going up. And what are those costs? Paratransit, Meals on Wheels, nurse-assisted living, etc. Federal government, their costs go up at about 55, 60. What is that? That's Medicare, that's Social Security. What are the pressures in this system? We're underinvesting in little kids, something horrible. This is your moment for brain development. If you miss this moment of the first 3 years of life, there's not a whole lot else you can do. And yet we ask parents, these parents at the beginning of their lives, of their working lives, when they don't have a lot of money, we ask them to bear the full cost of early education of their children. Once the kid hits 5, it's publicly funded, and once they go to college, it's still got some public subsidy. But for the little kids, practically nothing. That needs to change. There is something that's changing. Our friends down on Capitol Hill are talking about entitlement reform, and what they mean is giving less and giving it later. And what does that mean for you? That means that this red line of taking care of the cost of taking care of your senior citizens is actually going to grow, because the federal government is going to pass it on to you. And these are all in your handouts. There's a handout in your book if you want to see what these pictures look like. On the revenue side, the federal government gets those big earning years. They get the big blue bump up when you're making your most income. State and local don't get much, and the only reason why this line really curves up is because states in there, and they have, many states have income taxes. How many of you have a local income tax? Good for you. At least you're capturing a little piece of this. But there isn't a whole big difference across this age range. All right, that's enough on expenditure. Let's talk about a different kind of expenditure. Let's talk about private expenditure. Let's talk about economic development. And you know, Richard Florida's a nice guy, but he's wrong on a couple of things. And one of the things he's wrong on is this notion that these young professionals are what drives your economy. When you rebuild your city with 1- and 2-bedroom apartments for young professionals and empty nesters, you force the people in the middle with families to leave to the suburbs, because there's no place for them to stay. And who spends the most in your economy? Are people in the middle. And what do they spend it on? The average family spends $250,000 raising a child. Poor people spend about $10,000 less. USDA actually collects this data. This is big money. And 77% of this money is spent in your local economy. Housing, clothing, health care, transportation, food, child care. These are local services that improve the quality of life for everyone, that create employment opportunities for people at all skill levels. Ann Markison, who does work on economic development, challenges the cluster approach that we heard this morning by pointing out that cities are not that distinctive. In fact, this is what the mayor of Chapel Hill was saying. You know, there's a lot that's similar about it. Yes, 80% of city economies are similar across all cities. And they're about the local services that we all need to eat, to clothe ourselves, to house ourselves, to get around, and to have care. And let's talk about the care sector. Because I tell you, it's an invisible sector that we better bring above the waterline and start thinking about. Think of an iceberg. And at the tip of that iceberg, and these numbers are on child care. At the very tip top, we have center-based child care. That is not where most of the children are. The next little line above the waterline is family-based child care, in family homes. Below that line is informal paid child care. If anyone in your community works a second and a third shift or on a weekend, their children are not above the waterline. Because I doubt that any of your communities have child care open in the evenings and on weekends. Add all of that together, and it's equal to the next line, which is unpaid family, friend, and neighbor care. Us supporting each other in a community sense. And go below that, an even bigger piece is unpaid parental care. Parents taking care of their parents, and parents taking care of their kids. That's folks in the sandwich. The American Time Use Survey measures this. It's equal to 1 in 5 of every workers in America. It is huge. It is ignored, and we need to do something about it. At the top end, you could focus your economic development strategies on improving this very fragile sector that has many market challenges. In this first line, under the waterline, you could think of economic development strategies that encourage these informal actors to come into the formal economy. And down here, at the bottom, you need to focus on planning and redesign of your city. And that takes me back to the first slide where we think about how do we design a city for everyone. So about 5 years ago, I said, since planners are part of the problem, we need to turn them into part of the solution. And I convinced the American Planning Association to let us do a survey on planners' role in creating family-friendly cities. And what we did is we surveyed attitudes, barriers, actions, and zoning and site planning. This is in your handout. And what they identified is the stuff that you'll hear a lot more from Laura at the end of this presentation on housing, transportation and mobility, education, finance. Finance is really important. How do you pay for this stuff? And what role can your zoning code, the rules you have the power, Congress can't tell you you can't do it, you have the power to actually do these things. How can they affect the ability to actually deliver these services on the ground? So let's just go through a couple. Let's take housing, for example. We asked, does the community where you work have multifamily housing? Yes or no? Only 2/3 said yes. A third don't have any multifamily housing. They don't have zoning regulations that promote it. 60% have family size, but 40% don't. Think, do your regulations allow and promote family size housing? That means more than 2 bedrooms. How about affordable housing? Only 39% say yes. And accessory apartments by right? Only a quarter. Only a quarter of the communities where these planners work allow accessory flats. Now that's one thing you can do if you're in a community that doesn't have a lot of large-scale new development opportunity. You have the ability to increase the density and to create the kinds of intergenerational connections you're talking about getting in your apartment building. How about transportation and mobility? Well, everybody says they've got sidewalks. Well, yeah, but on how many streets? 76% say they have 5 lanes. How many miles worth of it? Does it get you to where you need to go? Walk to school programs, here we're getting a little bit more real. Only half of them have walk to school programs. Come on, we got a childhood obesity. Education. Here's the big. How many of you have any control over your schools of any type?
There you go.
How many of you collaborate with your schools in any way? Oh, wonderful. Do any of you do site planning with the schools for siting the schools? Do any of you do shared services in the schools that are not just for the kids, but for the broader community? Cool. So you get what I'm talking about. I love this picture of Charlotte, North Carolina, where they put a light rail station, a parking garage next to a school. They evened up the territory so that they could have a ball field for the kids because the area was on a steep slope. or the Stapleton Airport redevelopment, where the school is providing the community center for the neighborhood. And I really love the New York City example of school buses getting used in the middle of the day to take seniors to the grocery store. How many of you use your school buses for something other than children? You know, the majority of U.S. communities don't have bus transit at all. Every U.S. community has a public transit system called a school bus. Could we figure this one out? Sure, there'll be liability issues. You'll have to think about it, but you know this goes both ways. In this picture, you have a man being tutored on how to use the computer, and in the background, you have somebody else tutoring a student on reading. You know, it cuts both ways. How about child care? Folks, we got a big problem with child care. By their own admission, only 20% of responding planners think their communities have an adequate supply of child care. They may be a little high on that number, say 20%. But when you look at our zoning codes, only 2/3 of our zoning codes allow child care centers. Guess what? Child care is a NIMBY issue. People don't like the noise of happy children playing in the playgrounds here. They also don't like parents drop off and pick up. And guess what? This is a different kind of kiss and ride. You need to park your car, you need to get the carrier out of your car, you need to walk in, get the kids settled, and then go back out. This is not a 2-second kiss and ride. This is a 10 to 15-minute parking spot. Family home child care by right only allowed in 34% of zoning codes. That's ridiculous. Salinas, California, not known as the most progressive place in the world, builds low-income housing designed to be family child care. So guess what? The person will have an income that they can use to pay their rent. And they'll provide a needed child care service in an underserved community. You know where the most child care is? Where upper middle income people live. Child care, if you map it, do a GIS map on child care in your community, and the poorest communities have the least child care. You can also co-locate it with affordable housing and transit stops. And you can use impact fees to get there. So here's an example in Oakland, where they've got a Head Start Center, multifamily, affordable housing. They put the playground on the 3rd floor roof. And here's the BART stop. But guess what? None of the families that use this Head Start live in that affordable housing. You know why? Most of them are immigrants, so they're not legally, they can't access that housing. They live 4 families to 1 apartment. They don't use the transit either, because the mothers tend to take care of the kids, and the fathers go and stand in front of a particular chain link fence from somewhere to try to get day labor jobs. So they're not catching the BART station. They really like the Head Start Center. They like it a lot, but it's actually not next to where they are. Okay, impact fees. It's time for the developers to step up to the plate. It turns out that when we ran a regression analysis on these communities, we discovered that those that use impact fees to fund community services have lower crime rates. Tell that to your developers the next time they're asking you for a tax abatement and you say, no, I want you to pay an additional developer impact fee to provide the services that we need in this community to make this community a good place for your investment to pay off. And they'll say, what? And you say, yes, the research shows that communities that have impact fees have lower crime rates, and I'm controlling for everything else that criminologists say could lead you to crime. The development community, if people don't want to pay taxes, then you've got to put in development fees. One way or the other, we have to pay for these services. And the benefits accrue to the entire community, not just to the children. Why are impact fees so important? You know, if you're lucky, you're old for a long time. But you're only young for a few years. And if you have the misfortune of being born into a community where your neighborhood doesn't have a park, doesn't have a community center, doesn't have quality child care, you miss out. You're only young once, and it's not for very long. Which is why we ignore children, because they're parents' responsibility, and if the kids don't get adequate service, it's the parents' fault. Well, no, it isn't. We're in a society where we expect every parent to work, and we need support. Australia has been using impact fees for 20 years, and now people won't buy houses if they don't, or if they're not in a community with full services. And I'm talking parks, bike paths, community centers, libraries. They don't wait a generation to get these things. They build them into the developer impact fee. Okay, the other thing we were kind of interested in with this survey of planners is what leads to action? What causes some communities to act and others not? And we had this idea that NIMBYism might sort of push back. Like when you act, you'll get more resistance. And so we wanted to see what drives what. And what we discovered is it's the nitty-gritty detail. Write your site planning and zoning codes. Just get the stuff right in those codes, and you'll get more action. And involve youth and young families in your planning participation process, because that'll help you see where you need to go. These are things that are easy to do. Your planners can do these things. What drives resistance is lack of awareness and knowledge, primarily. Ignorance drives resistance. So let's talk about youth planning. You know, most communities think of their youth as a nuisance. How can we keep them off the streets? How can we keep them out of trouble? Well, why don't you engage them? Turn graffiti into murals. You know, how many of you build skate parks or skateboard parks? I mean, give them a safe place to play. Involve them in planning. They've got a lot of energy. They've got a lot of good ideas. When you think about resistance, what we were able to do statistically is figure out that actually resistance and ignorance are two different things. So this blocking NIMBYism approach that we all hate because it makes it very difficult is one issue, but the lack of awareness and knowledge is another issue, and that's one that we can work on with education. And it's that one, of all of the ones that we test in the model, it's that one that matters the most on leading to resistance. So that's a place where we can work. And the only thing that reduces resistance is positive attitudes. And I'm here to tell you that planners have very positive attitudes about kids. Even though they often do things that are kind of not so good for kids, they actually have positive attitudes about kids. So you ought to be able to go back, work with your planner, and expect some forward movement. They recognize that these were the kinds of value statements we had them on Likert scales of do you agree and how much do you agree. And these are the folks that agree or agree very strongly with the statement. They recognize this notion about families as a consumer population. They see that the needs of families and seniors are similar, but only 2/3 of them see that. And that's why I'm really glad that we're on a panel today about multi-generational planning, because a lot of the things that elders need to age in place are the same things that kids need to develop well. There's a few places where it's different, but there's a lot of overlap. And finally, only half believe this myth that families don't generate sufficient tax revenue to cover the cost of services they demand. We do need to work on that one. So with that, the vision for the future, I think, is building communities for everyone, an inclusive design, shared and integrated services, and hopefully that will get us to a common vision. Thank you.